This is Jack Dorsey, the deca-billionaire founder of Twitter and Square in November of 2017. And this is Jack Dorsey in March of 2021. Within this 3.5-year time span, it seems like Jack has aged 10 to 15 years. Aside from a major jump in physical aging, it seems like Jack has also made a significant mental transformation as well. He's more mellow, reserved, and distant than ever before. So, what happened to Jack? Well, to really understand this transition, I think we have to look at the entirety of his career and analyze all of the shifts throughout it. Taking a look back at Jack's first business endeavor, we go all the way back to 1990, when he was only 14 years old. At the time, Jack started working on some open source software that could help some local taxi companies dispatch their drivers. A couple of years later, Jack would enroll in the University of Missouri, where he of course majored in computer science. He would only complete a little over 2 years at the University of Missouri before transferring to New York University. Ironically, he would drop out of NYU, but not before completing 2 full years here as well. He only had 1 semester left when he dropped out. After college, Jack would move to San Francisco in 1999 and work on improving his taxi dispatching service. He would expand the service to work through the internet and allow for the dispatching of couriers and emergency vehicles as well. Around this same time, Jack would develop a beta program that allowed BlackBerry users to update their friends and family about their status. Jack says that no one really cared about the idea at the time, so he stashed it away and continued working at his dispatch company. Things at the dispatch company, however, weren't doing so hot. In 2002, we were at the bottom of the dot-com crash, and Jack would get into a fight with the board members and get fired. This was a massive blow for Jack. The dispatching service had been a focal point in his life since he was 14 years old, and now he was back to ground zero. Feeling defeated, Jack would move back home to St. Louis, and the next couple of years of his life are actually quite similar to his current life. Jack went ahead and got a nose ring, an S-shaped tattoo, and he would become a licensed massage therapist. Really quite a turn from his life in Silicon Valley, but he didn't leave everything behind. It seems like he was reluctant to leave behind programming, as Jack would attempt to create a chair massage service for programmers with wrist aches. As you would guess, this effort did not go very far, and Jack would move back to San Francisco in 2005 and get a programming job at Odeo. Odeo was a podcasting platform that aimed to take advantage of the rise of MP3 files. But in 2005, Apple announced that iTunes would launch its own podcasting platform. And given the dominance of the iPod, Odeo felt that they had no chance against Apple. In reality, I don't think they were actually screwed by any means. In retrospect, they were super early to the market, and they probably could have survived against Apple. I mean, just take a look at Spotify, which was literally founded after these guys gave up on Odeo. Nonetheless, the Odeo team no longer felt confident in their business, so they started looking for ways to pivot the company. And this is when Jack would bring up his stashed idea for a messaging platform centered on person status. Noah Glass really liked the idea, and he was basically all in. Evan Williams and Biz Stone, Twitter's other co-founders, weren't nearly as enthusiastic, but they went along with the idea. On March 21, 2006, Jack would make the first tweet stating, "Just setting up my Twitter." Later that year, the team would propose a new direction of Odeo to their investors, but their investors weren't impressed whatsoever, since this wasn't the original project that the investors committed to, and the fact that they weren't too interested in the new idea. Evan Williams would buy back the shares from the investors and let Jack run the company as CEO. Something important to note is that Jack would actually take out his nose ring, and he would cover up his tattoo to better fit the CEO look. Unfortunately though, Jack's time as CEO wouldn't last too long. In 2008, Evan Williams and the board would oust Jack Dorsey, pinpointing a couple of key reasons for why he wasn't fit as CEO. Number 1, Jack hadn't solved the constant outages that Twitter experienced. Number 2, Jack had yet to create a backup system for Twitter. And number 3, believe it or not, was that Jack left work early to go to yoga classes and fashion shows. Evan Williams told him, "You can either be a dressmaker or the CEO of Twitter, but you can't be both." As you can see, Jack has always been a quirky guy with various interests outside of work. This isn't a bad thing by any means, but it is uncharacteristic of most tech company founders who just work 24/7, especially in the early days of their companies. Unfortunately for Jack, this got him ousted from Twitter, and he was back to ground one once again. They did let him keep his stake in Twitter though, so that's good. Determined to prove himself though, Jack would start looking for new business opportunities. He actually almost joined Facebook, but he would later decide against that. In 2009, one of Jack's friends, Jim McKelvey, was looking to sell a glass faucet for $2,000. But his inability to accept credit cards made the entire process much more difficult. So, Jack and Jim would start a company that would allow small merchants and sellers to accept credit cards, and this was, of course, Square. But what was super interesting though was how Jack decided to carry himself during the early days of Square. His yoga and fashion habits didn't serve him well at Twitter, so he decided to emulate one of the most notable CEOs of all time, Steve Jobs. This was a really weird part of his life as something just seemed off. I mean, just look at these pictures. I'm not sure if he was trying to make a statement or if he felt forced to fit into a specific mold, but he was clearly not being himself during this time period. On the bright side, things would start to finally pick up with his career. Not only was Square growing rapidly, but in 2011, Evan Williams would be ousted by Twitter, which created an opportunity for Jack to rejoin Twitter as executive chairman. In November of 2013, Twitter would go public, which made Jack a billionaire worth $1.05 billion. And soon enough, Jack Dorsey would be reinstated as Twitter CEO in October of 2015. Since then, his net worth has continued to grow rapidly. But though he's mostly known for Twitter, the vast majority of Jack's $12.5 billion fortune today actually comes from Square. So, in retrospect, it looks like being fired from Twitter was actually a positive thing long term. But anyway, that brings us to where we are today. Looking back at his story, it's pretty clear that Jack never really fit the mold of a typical CEO. I mean, the guy is a massage therapist, an avid fashion fan, and he has plenty of other uncommon characteristics, some of which are great, while others are questionable. For instance, Jack walks 5 miles to work every day. This is an awesome habit, and as Jack describes it, it's the best investment he can make. Meanwhile, Jack is also known for only eating 1 meal per day or 7 meals per week. This is ironically actually more than he used to eat, as he used to fast on the weekend, meaning that he only ate 5 meals per week. I think we'd agree that this habit is quite questionable, but nonetheless, it simply further supports Jack's bizarre character traits. It seems like Jack was never able to freely express this side of him. When he became Twitter's CEO, he dropped a nose ring. And when he founded Square, he started acting like Steve Jobs. Even after he dropped the Steve Jobs act, he maintained looking like a typical tech CEO. But this was never really his true self. He had to more or less keep up this persona, as drifting away clearly had repercussions such as being fired from Twitter. But Jack is no longer the rookie on the street trying to prove his startup to investors. He's one of the most established tech billionaires around, and he no longer needs to act a certain way to earn the trust of investors. He's able to be himself, and this includes growing out his beard, wearing a nose ring, and going bald. So that explains the recent shift in appearance. But what about the rapid aging? Well, the reasoning behind this is twofold. Starting with the obvious reason, Jack Dorsey has been experiencing unfathomable levels of stress and pressure over the past couple of years. When Twitter was created, Barack Obama was one of the first people to use the platform to promote his own campaign. But despite that, Twitter wasn't that political in the early days. For the most part, it was just YouTubers and celebrities posting updates about their personal lives and promoting their businesses. Since 2016 though, Twitter has become one of the most politically divisive platforms out there. Jack Dorsey has faced an onslaught of censorship lawsuits and public criticism. The right thinks that Twitter should not be allowed to censor, while much of the left thinks that Twitter does not do their job to prevent the spread of misinformation. Regardless of what the truth is, neither side thinks that Jack is doing his job right, and this has garnered him significant hate from both sides. In fact, I'd argue that Jack Dorsey is one of the most despised CEOs out there, probably only beaten out by Mark Zuckerberg. And there's no doubt that such extreme levels of controversy comes along with extraordinary amounts of stress and subsequently rapid aging. Given that Jack Dorsey no longer cares about looking good for the public, it's not surprising that he doesn't dye his beard or put on makeup or things along those lines. But I think the deeper reason for Jack's recent transition is an internal guilt. In May of 2021, Jack said, quote, "If someone is in pain, I am in pain." And over the past couple of years, Jack basically witnessed firsthand the collapse of California around him. The homeless population in California has skyrocketed, and the pandemic has only made things worse. Now, I'm not saying that Jack Dorsey is some selfless hero or anything, but something to keep in mind is that Jack literally has nothing else to focus on. He's not married, he's never been married, and he has no kids. So, for Jack, it's basically just work and his hobbies. He has no one to save his wealth for and no one to really share it with. And I think he truly feels guilty for just having all of this money while his entire city and community is suffering. Jack Dorsey said that he wants to give out all of his money in his lifetime, and he hasn't been afraid to start big. Last year, he donated a whopping $1 billion to charity, which was at the time 28% of his entire net worth. Percentage-wise, this is one of the biggest donations we've ever seen, especially in one go. At the end of the day, Jack Dorsey has always been a quirky guy. However, he was forced to conform to the ideals of Silicon Valley in order to make his ambitions a reality. Now that he's well established though, Jack has chosen to unapologetically be himself and give back as he wants to quote, see the impact selfishly in my lifetime. Do you guys think that Jack Dorsey is one of the most misunderstood souls in Silicon Valley? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you're glad to see his generous giving. And of course, consider joining our Discord community to suggest future video ideas and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Ari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.